Donna Marie Miller, and I'm the author of the book, Texas Secessionists Standoff, the 1997 Republic of Texas War, published by Texas A&M Press. And I'm really proud to have my launch of my book here today in the 25th anniversary year of the standoff. And I have with me today two very, very prominent people in my book, Captain Barry Cavers and negotiator Jess Malone. Both of them are Texas Rangers at the time of the book. And what I thought I'd do is I'd tell you a little bit first about how I started to write this book, and then I'm going to turn it over to them so that they can tell their part of the story, which is crucial to the standoff in general. I like to say that I start my book with Joanne Kennedy Turner because she proved to be the catalyst to this story. She was arrested on April 22nd, 1997 in Austin for writing liens against businesses and government agencies on behalf of the Republic of Texas. This was one of their MOs, that they would write liens to freeze up companies doing business. And Joanne was arrested and put in Travis County Jail. And immediately she phoned, not her husband, but Richard Lance McLaren, the ambassador of the Republic of Texas. And he said, "I'll be sure to get you out real soon," but that didn't happen. There was an interim of 5 days that passed, and in those 5 days, a lot happened in the Davis Mountains, where Richard Lance McLaren had holed up in a trailer in a lean-to that he called his embassy of the Republic of Texas militia. And the neighbors around them were not happy at all with the maneuvers and the war games that were going on in the mountains. And they had reported it to several people in law enforcement over the past year. And Sheriff Steve Bailey of the Jeff Davis County had heard most of those complaints coming from Joe Rowe, who was a resident who lived at the very front of the Davis Mountain Resort. And one day, he saw some people up on the ridge looking down at him and had their guns pointed at his house. So he telephoned Steve Bailey and told him to make some changes, make an arrest. And Steve Bailey said, "I will once they leave the premises, the Davis Mountain Resort." So Robert Scheit, one of the lieutenants of the Republic of Texas, left the Davis Mountain Resort in a white van, and when he did, Steve Bailey pulled him over and made an arrest and found several illegal modified weapons in his vehicle. And in my book, I tell a lot of really cool details about what went down and miscommunications in that moment and who all was involved. But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because at that moment, we also had some people up in the embassy who decided that by listening to the radio that Robert Scheit might have been shot and killed. So they decided to take the Joe Rowe homestead, because it lay right at the beginning of the gate to the Davis Mountains, and to use that as a lookout for them to negotiate with the state of Texas, because they believed that they were an independent nation and they wanted the United States to release Texas to them because they believed that it had been annexed illegally in 1845. Well, one thing led to another, and 3 individuals attacked Joe Rowe's homestead and Joe Rowe. And that was Greg Paulson and his wife Karen Paulson and Richard Keyes. And Greg Paulson shot through the front door of Joe Rowe's house and shot Joe Rowe through the shoulder, and pieces of the door created shrapnel in his chest. And then they took the homestead and they took the Roes hostage. The wife of Joe Roe, Margaret Ann, her name was abbreviated Ma, she got on the radio and called the dispatcher and said, we're being taken hostage, get my sheriff. And David Duncan, who was a ranger at the time too, heard this dispatch, and he called Barry Caver in Midland and said, get down here, we have a problem. So I'm going to let Barry Caver kind of tell you what happened next in this incredible story, true story, crime story of the Republic of Texas standoff in the Davis Mountains in 1997.
Thank you, Donna. And just so you know, this is the first time I've ever met this lady. We've had a lot of discussion through emails, text messages, phone calls to get this to where it is today. And I can't thank her enough for putting this together. And this is probably one of the most factual books you'll ever read. You know, there's not a lot of author fluff, not a lot of, not necessarily entertainment purposes, but it's fact. This is what happened, this is how it happened. But what I really have enjoyed and appreciate about this book is it gives you background on what happened way before this standoff ever happened that Jess and I didn't even know. We didn't know anything about the players, we didn't know what happened, and to be honest with you, we really didn't care at the time. We had a mission, we had a job to do, and we were trying to do that job. But again, I spent 19 years in the Rangers, so it's very surreal to me to come into this Hall of Fame. Knowing that the people that represent the Rangers around this room in these cases are part of history. And I believe Jess and I have made part of that history only because we're just doing our job, doing what we get paid to do. So it's very emotional to me to think about it, but only because this badge is greater than we are. It represents almost 200 years of history, which we're about to celebrate in 2023. So it's...
My job for 15 years was to make him look good. And at times, I made him look not so good. But he was a great boss, and you have to understand the times we lived in then and what was going on in the world, and it's crazy today. But we're right on the heels of Waco, and Barry was here at Waco. The federal government made a mess of the situation, and the Rangers took over, and they did the cleanup with the 83 or 86 bodies that was a result of it. The Murrah bombing in Oklahoma City was in '94. And I told a little story earlier, they were actually sending Rangers to Oklahoma City, Texas Rangers. I'd started that way. The governor of Oklahoma was a Republican. The governor of Texas at the time was a fellow named George Bush. And they said, you guys have been through all of this stuff down there in Waco, and we've got a mess, and it's potentially going to be a situation, even with the ATF and everybody else, that we're going to need your expertise. We did get turned around, I think, at Dallas or south of Dallas, but we were fixing to be Oklahoma Rangers. But the times were so crazy then with the separatist movements. I don't believe in license plates, I don't believe in driver's license, I don't believe in paying taxes. And this was a kind of a resounding thing that I had during negotiations. I said, hell, I don't like to pay taxes. I was telling these people inside, I don't like all of these things too, but until we come up with a better system, we got to play by the rules, and the laws are the law. And that's what Captain Caver and I kept telling him, we got it, we understand, but you still got to play by the rules of the state of Texas, and that's the law of the land, and that's where we're going with that. So we're coming off of these major events, and Gary Nesner, who did the foreword in the book, was the head negotiator. He was the head supervisor for the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States of America. And you understand, too, that the FBI goes overseas and does a lot of work. So Gary had vast amount of experience, and basically he showed up and said, don't do what we've done. Because they made some really critical mistakes here at Waco. And there was a time he wasn't quite emotional like he was a few minutes ago, where he said, I'm about ready to run in there and roll over these people with every tank that we have. Because we'd had enough of it, about 7 days of this. And Gary would again be the voice of calm and reasoning, because the Rangers are not an organization to sit on their thumbs or their hands. We have a great deal of latitude, a great deal of ability to operate. Doug's from Austin Police Department here, and we were state troopers before we got in the Rangers. And there's a lot of constraint in those positions, and that's what's been great about the Rangers over the years. We still follow the Constitution of the United States of America, don't get me wrong. Although I'll tell you a funny story about that during Fort Davis about I suspended the Constitution for a few minutes. And I'll go to that story. Their lawyer for the separatists inside was saying they have constitutional rights, and my stand on the matter was we need to get as many of these people out alive as we can, because he wanted to interview them before we interviewed them. And I said, right now the Constitution's been suspended, and I said, you see them 2 big troopers over there? They will take you out on a stretcher or hand in hand, but we're not worried. We're worried about saving lives here. We're not going to violate their civil rights. But let's quit focusing on law and focus on the human side of it, because, like I said, the country had just come off of huge tragedies at Waco, huge tragedies at Oklahoma City, and we were charged with getting it right. And that was a monumental task and a lot of pressure. And I think we probably slept 4 hours a day for a week. If I never see another burrito again, it won't be too soon. Because that you hear this thing about an army fights on its stomach. We had absolutely no food. I know it's hard for you to believe that this area was so remote, but it was just, this man right here was in charge of getting everything organized, and we had literally, I don't know the manpower that we had, because when you go to battle, you never want to be shorthanded. And so I know we had at least 250 state troopers under his command that we were trying to, gradually and incrementally, control this thing and try to get a grip on it where we could get this. And a lot of people ask me, said, what's the Republic of Texas? I've never heard of it. I've never heard of the standoff. Because we didn't kill a lot of people. There was only one fatality as far as human. We lost Sugar, a prison dog, that was shot by one of the separatists. And we showed that dog full military honors. We brought the dog up and out first before we brought that guy out, because the dog died in the line of duty. And prison dogs are trained to track you. They're not trained to attack you. They just find you and they kind of tag, you're it. And he shot this dog for no reason at all. And I'm an animal lover, my wife is. But, it's just one of the situations we were under an intense amount of pressure, but yet we had an intense amount of latitude given to us by the director of DPS and law enforcement in general, and so that we could kind of push through this thing and resolve it. And you may throw it back at you,
I'm good.
Barry. Yeah. Well, it is emotional. I broke down about it before, speaking about it as well, because in hindsight, I think God played a huge part in it, but it could have went wrong very quickly. And there's some situations in the book where it talks about it. We had guys from Vietnam there, and I'll shut up just a moment, that were explosive ordnance detail guys in Vietnam that had training, and we had to get them because there were so many damn bombs. Had we went in there and just full bore and did a full-blown attack, the number of law enforcement casualties, we don't even know what they would have been. So it's a measured approach. You have to contain your emotions, and there was times when that was difficult to do, given the task at hand. Boss?
Yeah, we had never experienced anything like this in the Rangers that I'm aware of, at least in modern times. And certainly I did not as a 6-month rookie captain. So Jess and I basically, and all the other Rangers, were flying by the seat of our pants, trying to figure out what to do, what to do next. Try to rely on good common sense versus policy, laws, and that sort of thing. You know, everybody hears, even today, you don't negotiate with terrorists. Well, I felt like that was the wrong approach. I had an injured person in this house, Mr. Joe Rowe, who was a heart patient. He'd recently had heart surgery, had still on blood thinners and that sort. And we knew he was injured. We knew we had to get him out of there one way or another. And so Jess and I had no formal negotiation training or skills. Again, it was my position as a captain of the Rangers to take command of that situation and figure it out the best I could. So I immediately began negotiating with the hostage takers, 3 of those folks who broke in the Rowe residence, to try to figure out who they were, what they were doing, why they were there. And then that's when we later found out about Miss Turner. We had no idea who she was, what had happened, what had transpired. Luckily, Sheriff Bailey had come to me about 2 months prior to this event and told me they were watching this group. They would be inundated with people on the weekends to come and do their firearms training, their practice, their shooting their automatic weapons, and he was very concerned. The problem was they really hadn't broken any laws up to that point. But whenever they took the Rose hostage, that gave us legitimate law enforcement concern and criminal charges that we could use to do what we needed to do. But like Jess said, we had probably 250 plus troopers there, all kinds of other firefighting equipment. And my son is here. He's a captain with the fire department. He can appreciate this. I had no idea what incident command was. We'd never had a necessity to use that. So luckily we called the Texas Forest Service. They came out with their masses of bulldozers, tractors, because at one point in time McLaren threatened to burn the valley down, including us with it.
And would have been successful.
Yeah, the winds were just right. The valley was shaped in such a way it would come right into our command post, and he would have succeeded in doing that. So luckily with their incident command experience and bringing that system on board, they were able to handle all the daily manpower issues. I didn't have to worry about that. But eventually I was able to negotiate with the bunch, figure out it was McLaren, figure he ordered the attack, and they told me why, because of the arrest of Robert Scheidt by Steve Bailey, whom they thought had been killed. And Jess will touch on this too, I'm sure. The fact that they overheard a radio conversation of a death, unattended death as we call it in the business, where somebody just dies at home for no apparent reason, maybe sick, something like that. They thought Robert Scheidt was the one that Sheriff Bailey just killed, which is totally not accurate, as you'll find out. But that's what led up into this whole siege and the whole taking of the hostages. And once we were able to negotiate that release, and it was a whole other experience on how we were able to negotiate and make that happen, to make sure that I didn't get double-crossed in the process as we sent Rangers and other personnel in the ambulances, followed by some deputies and other Rangers, to make sure that the trade went like it's supposed to go. Luckily, everything worked out. And that's when I realized, as the commander, I could not command this incident and be a negotiator. That's when I asked this man to take over, and I'll let him go from there.
Yeah, and I said, gee, thanks. Just what I want to do, talk to crazy people for the next week of the rest of my life. But, you know, they just had their beliefs, and I want to touch on something that might be a little bit enlightening. We had no formal training, but we had good common sense, and that's always been the trademark of the Rangers. Incident command, what incident command? You call us, we're going to kill you. That's what we were trained in. That's what the Rangers have been called in. If you've got something that's really evil, call the Rangers. And it went against everything that we had been taught, because we're the last line when it comes to events like this. And it changed our thinking and our thought process. And Gary Nesner being there from the FBI, and he's good friends of Captain Caver and I, it taught us. And even going forward, and I'll introduce you to the 2008 incident commander at the polygamous standoff at El Dorado, Texas. And some of you may remember that. People call him Little House on the Prairie. Barry Caver. And Guess who he brought with him? So, but the philosophy of somebody who has a religious belief versus a philosophy, and when I say religious belief, like our good friend here in Waco, David Koresh, who led the folks here. And then we've got people who are separatists, so you've got to understand the difference in the mindset. I would say it's fair to believe our religious beliefs are a lot stronger than our beliefs against the government. Most people are. So you're dealing with a different mindset when you're negotiating with these people. In true law enforcement fashion, once I went through this hailstorm, then they decided to send me to school. So I went to Quantico, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Dr. Michael Webster is the foremost expert in crisis negotiations. And they use what's called an incremental pressure. And incremental pressure is you use negotiations, but occasionally you show somebody you can put the clamp on them. You can use force. And so you bring somebody from a very irrational stage back into a rational stage. And you have to do it slowly but surely. But again, I'll emphasize to you, you have to understand a mindset and the background of somebody. Is it a religious thing that we're fighting against? Is it an anti-government thing that we're fighting against? It is a domestic dispute between a man and a woman. You know, so you have to just know what you're dealing with. And you've got to have a great leader behind you. And I can't brag on Captain Caver. Like I said, he was my captain for 15 years, but he's a friend for life. And he had the latitude within the Rangers to handle the situation in such a way that it had a successful resolution for the most part. The negotiations, the incremental pressure I was telling you about, and I've told this story, he asked me what I wanted, what I needed. I said, I need a tank. He never batted his eye. How big a tank? Biggest one you can get me. And so what we did is we got a actual M88 tank retriever. It's not a tank, it's the wrecker they use to pick up tanks. So you can imagine how big this thing was. And as part of our strategy, we actually paraded it by Satellite City. And that was where all the media was and the big trucks. I mean, there was like thousands of people out there 12 miles from this event. They were broadcasting all this, and they were sending pictures back inside of this tank. Well, during the negotiations, they got pretty tense at times. And at times, the people inside would get downright vulgar, and I mean just break down screaming at me, calling me everything but a white man. And we were talking about it this morning with Donna's husband. You know, you had to kind of bring them back into rationalization. I said, don't talk to me that way. I said, let's be civil. We can agree to disagree. And the rhetoric would continue, and I finally asked that tank commander, I said, tell me what you can do with that tank. National Guard, correct? And he said, I can run over everything but a domicile. And I said, that's a big word for a country boy. Domicile being a house? He said, yeah, can't run over a house. I said, go over there and flatten some of them cars. They had the cars around there.
They were blocking the roads into
Yeah.
with old cars and other things like that.
And you have to understand the terrain too. Mount Livermore, second highest peak in Texas, about 8,000 foot. Temperature's 20 degrees during the night, 85, 90 in the daytime. Crazy variations. And the winds, 40, 50 miles an hour, just brutal conditions. And you know, we ran the tank up there and ran over the houses. I mean, they hung up on me. They were cussing me so bad. And boy, the phone rang, and it sounded like a bunch of kids in puberty. They were screaming.
We got their attention.
Yeah, they were screaming. But just good old country boy tactics. One more funny story, or I thought it was humorous. They probably didn't. Again, they were being very difficult to deal with. And I'll tell you, being in law enforcement, I was in highway patrol, and the most dangerous person, and we can all attest to this, is somebody that's sleep deprived. I've seen people on drugs. I've seen people drunk. You get somebody that hadn't been asleep about 3 or 4 days, they can get really ugly, especially if they've got mental conditions to go with it. And so they were being very, very combative and we'd take one step forward and two step backward during negotiation. This wasn't my idea, it may have been Captain Caver's, but we had the Texas Department of Criminal Justice there, the prison system. We had their tracking dogs there, and thank God for Texas, we had all of these resources to support us. Yeah, the Rangers got the credit. Had this thing went down in a burning flame, we'd have got the blame for it too. But we had all of these good people from Texas, Fire Service, Forest Service, everybody. We had the game wardens there. We had all of these things we could fall back on. About 40 of those hound dogs that are trained to track you, not attack you. But you can't make them hound dogs shut up at night. They will bark and bark and bark. And so you just take them up there as close as you can get in the stock trailer and let them bark all night. And again, it's just a tactic that was used to kind of bring these people back to earth, you know. And I didn't want to get them to the point where they were psychotic and they hadn't slept in 4 or 5 days. But every now and then, you know, you give them a little dose of reality, you know. I mean, we're in control here. We're in charge. You just need to realize that. I need to bring you back to that rational state. And I guarantee you, 40 hound dogs barking all night outside your front door, you ain't gonna sleep. And it'll kind of bring, I said, look, if you quit talking ugly to me, I'll tell the puppies to come home. But you gotta stop this nonsense, and we gotta have some substantive talks. And Captain Caver was involved in this. He can talk to you about some of their demands, which, I don't know, they wanted to ride to Mars at one time or something, you know, in a horse-drawn carriage. I mean, it was just crazy. And he was the one that kind of negotiated them back into reality. We can guarantee you things that we can guarantee you. And a negotiator will never lie to you, a good one. And we never lied to them one time. Never let them on. You know, we just told them, hey, this is how it is. You know, they kept refusing all these things. You know, and giving us all the instant, I'm like, let's go back to this thing about shooting up Joe and Margaret Ann's house and shooting Joe. And y'all claim that you have all these beliefs and all these rights. I think we can agree on this one thing. When you're in your home, you should be safe. And you should be safe against anybody. I don't know you, you don't know me, but I wouldn't appreciate somebody breaking into your house and shooting at you, and you wouldn't appreciate somebody breaking into my house and shooting at me. So here we are. You started this by shooting into these people's houses. Regardless for what they've done, you're not justified in doing that. And that's the law of the land. And all of these beliefs that you have about let's not have a driver's license, let's not have a license plate, let's not believe in the law, we can all agree that what you did is not right. Not only is it not right, it's against the law. And that's why we're here. We're not here to debate with you or have rhetoric with you over your beliefs. We're here to debate with you and rhetoric with you over you broke the law. And you have to suffer the consequences. And Captain, you want to reiterate?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the fact that I've never, you know, I studied history in high school. I never really studied or gotten into how Texas was annexed into the Union in 1845. To be honest with you, didn't really care. I mean, it happened, it's history, okay, let's move on. Well, that was his whole thing. That was his whole concept on the Republic of Texas, which we all know actually did exist from 1836 to 1845. Whether it was illegally annexed or not, I have no idea. None of us were alive at that point in time, and there's no history that I'm aware of, no history books that talk about that, whether that really happened. So we had to rely on all of this stuff that he was telling Jess and I that made absolutely no sense. And you can't ration with an irrational person. So that's what he was. But what it all came down to is the fact that in 1823, the Texas Rangers were born. Some 13 years before the Republic of Texas. So he didn't know me as a person, but he recognized my authority as the captain of the Texas Rangers, that I had the authority to be there and had the authority to handle this. And once we got that out there, he realized he had to deal with me, and whatever I said was the law, because I was the law. Way before he was ever, you know, the Texas was in existence. So once we got all that out, he started, as Jess mentioned, he started coming up with these ceasefire agreements, which I had no idea what that even was. with all these stipulations in it, some 12 or 13 as I recall, of things that I had absolutely no control over. One of them being something about the Geneva Convention in The Hague. I said, Jeff, where's The Hague? I don't even know that place. You know, and so
Just east of Dallas.
yeah. So luckily Albert Valadez, our district attorney, was there on scene, and he was there to totally support us and help us in any way he could. And as Albert and I are discussing all of this stuff as to whether or not I wanted to sign this document or not, he said, if your bosses are okay with it, sign it. He said, because under Texas law, if you sign a document under duress, which is what this was, he said, you're not legally bound to whatever you sign or agree to. I said, okay. So after talking with the Colonel in Austin and Chief Castile and figuring, because none of them had ever gone through this either, so we're all learning this as we go. They said, sign it. I said, okay. So I signed my name to this, and you would have thought the heavens opened up and the waters parted and everything is good now. It's like, if I'd have known signing this document 6 days ago was going to solve this, I'd have done it then. But nobody knew. And so there was constant negotiation back and forth. We were used the armored personnel carriers to carry documents, these legal documents back and forth. And we were just going through the motions trying to figure out what he was trying to accomplish, what his goal was. But again, once I agreed to sign this document, it was like it's over. And Jess negotiated with Mrs. McLaren. Evelyn was there, who was inside with him, but we were able to use his daughters on scene, and I'll let Jess touch on that because he talked with them directly about how we knew what's the weakest link here. Who inside of here is the weakest link that we can identify to help us resolve this peacefully.
And when he talks about signing the document under duress, let me tell you what the definition of duress is. Duress is when you're negotiating with these people and you reach an impasse and they said, we're sending out our last will and testaments. Which basically told us they were either going to kill themselves or we were going to have to kill them. And so there's your duress right there. That's how you can define it. And so we got her daughter, Evelyn's daughters, and we're making what we felt like was a last minute appeal. And the girls were fabulous. You know, I coached them just a little bit. I said, just be yourself and speak from your heart. We don't want our kids to go to their grandmother's funeral. You know, and that's the kind of thing, there again, it was getting down to crunch time, and we felt like that maybe we could tip it over a little bit, and we convinced her, and, you know, she was one woman out there by herself, and that's another thing I'll touch on briefly. We weren't sure at that time how many people we had. Turned out we had a handful, 7 or 8, 9. Yeah. At some point during their training exercises, they had 50 to 100, 150 people out there, so we weren't, and you know, we're talking and dealing with them from afar. And I mean, we had aerial surveillance, we had LORS cameras, which are these great big military cameras. You can see like 5 miles and see somebody's eyelid, but we just weren't sure what they had. But we were able to kind of bring her over onto our side in the fact that she told me that evening after talking to the daughters in a collective sigh of relief that she would come out the next morning instead of this previous conversation about we're going to send out our last will and testaments. And of course, in true ladylike fashion, she agreed to come out at 8:30 the next morning, and she didn't show up. I thought, well, she's a woman, give her a little time. And a little time passed, and I started becoming concerned. I think Captain Cater came by and he said, is she coming out? I said, she swore she was coming out. And you know, it's one of those deals you don't want to pester him. You've got her on your side. You want to kind of go with what you got. But I thought I better call him there and just ask again, you know, where we're at. So I called in and you know, McLaren, I think, answered the phone. I said, may I speak to Evelyn? Sure. Cursory 10-minute wait. She finally gets on the phone. I said, Evelyn, are you coming? She said, I'm doing my makeup. Take your time, honey. Take your time. No big deal. And yeah, she finally, and it was quite some time later that she came out, but she was just getting, I know my wife and I know Tammy takes care of very, they get everything in order when we're ready to go. In typical lady fashion. And she was just getting everything in order so she could come out, because that had been her home. And, but yeah, that's my best definition of duress is during negotiations. Somebody tells you very somberly, we want to send out our last will and testaments. I'm thinking, this doesn't look good at all. So let me pass it back to you.
So Evelyn came out. Jess met her at the command post negotiation area, and she wanted, or McLaren wanted, to be assured that she was in our custody safely, but in her hand she also brought that ceasefire document. So Jess met her, gave her a big hug. I believe her attorney, O'Rourke, was still there at the
Terry
time.
O'Rourke.
He was also there to verify that everything was good. We were honoring our end of the bargain, so to speak, and she was allowed to get on the phone with him to call back in and say, hey, everything's good. Captain Caver signed the ceasefire agreement. We have what we want. It was almost like it kind of surprised him, I think, in a way, that really? I mean, it's okay. But what it boiled down to later on, we found out that by me signing that document, it gave them legitimacy as to him being the ambassador to the Republic of Texas, which obviously didn't exist. But by me, again, as my position as a captain with the Texas Rangers that started in 1823, I said it was legitimate. That's his logic, that's his mindset. Finally, they gathered all their belongings. McLaren and Robert White Eagle Otto agreed to come out. They start walking down the road. They were met by the Rangers and state troopers, taken into custody. But McLaren wanted to see me. He wanted to shake my hand. I thought that was really odd. I never would have dreamed of everything we just went through for 7 days. He wants to meet me and shake my hand. But again, we figured out at some point too that they wanted to be treated with dignity, respect, and again, to show their legitimacy on what they represented and who they represented. So there is a picture in Donna's book that it's very fond to me, that of me shaking his hand, but of course he's got handcuffs behind his back.
Looks like Barry's picking his pocket.
Yeah, I got a little jab here and there about that. But again, I was telling, I don't remember if it's Donna's husband or who I was telling, I've never had anyone, later on this went to federal court in Pecos. McLaren represented himself in court. He stood up in front of the judge and the jury to thank me, who I was on the stand at the time, to thank me for handling him in such a way, giving him the dignity and respect he felt like he deserved. It was really weird. I've never, since then, probably never will again. But that's the kind of mindset that we were dealing with. But what happened, even though Evelyn came out, McLaren came out, Otto came out, we still had four people still in there, but they were willing to surrender in a military style fashion. So on the back of Donna's book, there's a photograph that we took that symbolizes the military type surrender when they line their guns up in a circle around in a circular fashion. I'm not military, so I didn't understand that concept, but that's what that is. That's why they wanted to do that. So as we infiltrated the perimeter of the compound, we took, help me with the names, Greg Paulson and Karen Paulson, took them into custody, but two haul booty at the back way. So then we knew we had a totally different circumstance. Now we had everybody in custody. The scene was not secure, as Jess mentioned, of all the pipe bombs, these 5-gallon propane tanks that were ready to blow up if we tried to ambush or tried to infiltrate their compound. So we knew what we were dealing with, and we couldn't go after these other two. So that's where the TDC tracking dogs came in to help us, assist us in tracking these people down. And that's where Eric Tahachik, the TDC dog sergeant, used his own personal 30-06, as I recall, deer rifle, or maybe a 270, to kill one of the members after he shot one of the dogs that tried to attack him on the chase.
Any questions or anything? And I mean, we're kind of jumping around and everything. Again, when Evelyn McLaren came out, Terry O'Rourke was her lawyer, and he was lawyer representing him, and brilliant lawyer. I mean, had been talking to Dick DeGuerin. A lot of y'all have heard of Dick DeGuerin. He's one of the most famous criminal lawyers in the world. And he was insisting that they talk to Evelyn first. And I said, no, we need Evelyn to come with us, and Evelyn needs to go in to the control room, which is a trailer that we were talking back to him, you know, so we can get these people out. And he said, you know, the Constitution, I said, the Constitution's been suspended. She's coming with me. And she did. And of course, the next morning, he's on Good Morning America, and I'm going, oh God, I hope he doesn't say that. You know, but he did. He was a true gentleman. And it had a good outcome. And he knew that we met. I said, I'm not going to ask her anything regarding criminal charges. I just need her to call in to say everything is okay. And she did, and it was fabulous. And like I said, they came out, and Captain Caver made the decision. Like I said, it's a fast timeline, but once they came out and the two absconded, we had to spend literally an entire day with multiple teams going up the canyon, defusing all of these bombs. And there were propane tanks wired, there were gasoline, very volatile area. I mean, it's like a national forest. I mean, if you drop a match, it would have, and the wind blowing like it was, perfect time of year for it, very dry, a lot of snakes, a lot of big rattlesnakes. So we had to make a measured approach, and so we gave them basically a day head start to get through this maze of obstacles and bombs and everything. But I'll pass it over to our author. He, like I said again, folks, it's been a blessing to me to look at the story beginning with Joanne Kennedy Turner and what precipitated this, because you know we're results oriented. I didn't know who this lady was. I didn't know. I mean, I really didn't know much about the Republic of Texas. A quick story about what came of it that I enjoyed. I was sued by the Republic of Texas for $750 million.
Me too.
And they were notorious for this, and they would put these bogus liens on you. Try to go buy a car with a $750 million lien on it. We had to get the Attorney General's office involved and contact the 3 credit bureaus, Experian and all of those people to get this off my credit record. And these people would call, and even after all this happened, they would contact me and say, we had a trial based on your participation in Arkansas, and the results are is the jury found you guilty and you're supposed to be hung. I mean, these people, although we cut the head off the snake continued to exist. But the Texas legislature, and tell me politicians can't act in a fast form when they have to, they enacted 3 felony laws within 3 weeks. The legislature's never done anything in 3 weeks in their life except, you know, chase women and get drunk.
This was May 7th, and the legislature stopped at May 30th of that month.
Yeah, in 23 days, they enacted these 3 laws, which put some teeth. I mean, I'll give McLaren credit where credit's due. He knew how to work the system, and he went down and filed these bogus liens. I mean, you could file a lien about anything. Well, this guy's wearing a purple pair of socks in my yard, and I'm gonna file a lien against him. And that's kind of the way they were doing. Texas didn't have real strong lien laws. The legislature did that, and finally, boy, that put a stop to it. We had some around the middle of Odessa area where we were stationed, and I put 2 or 3 of them in jail on felony charges, and that stopped that nonsense.
It also helps when they issued arrest warrants for then Governor George Bush and Attorney General Dan Morales. So we kind of had them on our side a little bit. So they had some vested interest.
They were a little upset, and it's a little frustrating too. And I'm at one of those moments, you know, where I did.
In the state of Texas, they issued arrest warrants?
Yes, for the
In the
governor
Republic
state
of Texas courts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
As their independent?
Yes.
yeah, they had their own independent court system. They were quite elaborate, and you know, had like I said, we cut the head off the snake, but a huge group falls. Somebody put a $750 million lien on you, it can really mess up your life. And they would call me on the phone. When are you gonna pay your lien? And I just got so much of it, kind of frustrated, you know, and I'm trying to, you know, I mean, you can't do anything with that guy. I mean, even the banks don't have any common sense. You got a $750 million lien. Me, do I look like a $750 million kind of guy? And so they'd say, I say, look, okay, all right, you're right, I owe you $750 million. I said, I've got this dark alley that I'd like to meet you in, and I'll bring my checkbook.
Pay you cash.
Yeah, I'll pay you cash. And they would get kind of quiet, and they'd say, no, hang up on you. He got so frustrated. They even put it on the district attorney, a big lien on him. You know, and that's when, you know, he really,
So that's when the legislature.
I mean, within 23 days, it was unbelievable. Because to pass a bill, much less a law. And that's why I say, God bless Texas. Barry and I, and I don't want to offend anybody here from another state, but I would hate to see anything like this happen in another state, because Barry and I went on a whirlwind speaking tour, and we would go and encounter these various agencies and other states and stuff, and the reputation and the hierarchy and the abilities of the Rangers played a crucial role in resolving this. And we would talk to frustrated. Four Corners area in North America had 2 deputies killed up there, and the convicts are running in the Four Corners, which is 4 different states. Okay, now you got 4 different state police agencies involved. You got 4 different sheriff's offices involved from 4 different states. You got 4 different Indian reservations involved from 4 different states. My God, they said it was a mess. You know, they were trying to get somebody to do something. Now, that's not my responsibility. You're not supposed to be over here. You know, and that's what I say. We got all the credit. Thanks to him, he did a hell of a job. And the Rangers did a good job. If it had went south, it would have been a bad job. But at the end of the day, there was no doubt who was running the show. And that was us. And thank God for Texas for that. We had a massive federal agency response. Janet Reno, I think, called out there and spoke to Rich Garcia, who was the number 2 FBI man for that area. It looked like the end of a University of Texas football game. They were leaving there so fast because they had already been exposed to all of this, and they didn't see a good outcome for them. And it really wasn't a federal matter for the most part. It was a state matter. But it's no use them risking the reputation, but they did, and I think Captain Caver asked, and you correct me, we asked for them to leave a member of each agency there, and thus Gary Nessner came out from FBI Crisis. We had what they call the BORTAC unit, which that's the Border Patrol Desert Tactical Unit. You know, we didn't need the city tactical unit. There wasn't any cities within 100 miles of us. We needed these jungle warfare fighters from the Border Patrol. So we got specific guys that Captain Caver asked for. Let me get it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at the track record of FBI, they've got all kinds of black marks between Waco, Ruby Ridge, Oklahoma City. All these things led up to this. They could not afford another black eye. And the public sentiment towards the FBI had drastically changed because of all those things. So personally, other than Gary Nessner and Al Brantley, who was there as well, I mean, they helped us tremendously, as we touched on in the book. But to be honest with you, we didn't want their help. We didn't need their help. There was no federal nexus, as we call it in the business, to give them the authority or jurisdiction to handle that from a federal. They could have probably come up with some tax evasion or some, off the wall something. But at the time, they wanted nothing to do with it other than our local FBI as well. Was Terry's last name? Anyway.
Yeah.
O'Rourke, Terry
No,
O'Rourke?
it was the
No, he
local
was
FBI.
local
Anyway,
FBI guy.
we had local support, but they were ordered by Janet Reno and President Clinton to get out. And again, we felt abandoned at first. It's like, we don't need you. We can handle this.
And that's
we
the
did.
great thing about Texas. I talked to David McEther one night because we didn't know the forces we were up against, and I'm like, well, and talking to David, he was assistant director of Texas Department of Public Safety, who is an army unto itself, about 8,000 state troopers and agents and everything. And I said, I think I need 125 highway patrolmen. And this is one evening. The next morning, I look up, my cup of coffee after my 2 hours sleep. And there's 125 black and white patrol cars with engines running, 2 in each car. There's 250 troopers. Talked to David, which we called him Peanut, and he said, I want to make sure you had plenty. You know, no place but Texas because you could do something like that. But the resources that we had to pull upon and the support that we had all the way to the governor's office enabled us to do our job.
You know, we had one of the DPS commissioners in the command post with us, who was a good friend of ours from Midland, so we knew him before. But he was in direct communications with the governor's chief of staff and the governor. The governor actually called me the morning of, once we got resolved, to thank me for the way we handled it. So, you know, we had every resource we could think of at our disposal.
And funny stories about these things. I'm in negotiations, and this guy was a public safety commissioner, affluential, appointed by the governor, and he walks in while I'm in negotiations and doesn't realize I'm on the phone. And it was one of those kids I'm on the phone moment. Except I turned around and cussed about 4 times, and I said, shut the hell up. And I looked and I thought, oh, I can't believe I just said that. And he comes by in about 5 minutes and I said, I'm going to need another job after this one. I just told the commissioner for the Public Safety Commission to shut the hell up. And he's going, it's fine. And of course, the guy, he came in about 5 minutes.
What are they going to do?
He's laid his hand, I didn't know you were on the phone. I said, sorry.
I wanted to also add that once Mike Matson and Richard Keyes escaped into the mountains, and then Mike Matson was shot, Richard Keyes escaped and was not captured for months, about 3 months later. But you know, when this finally went to trial, the state prosecuted first on the main people who were responsible for the hostage situation. And then they held the McLarens, and they held Otto, and they held Scheit, and they held the Paulsons, and they held Keyes to await federal trial. The federal trial that was held in Dallas, first one was held in Dallas, was the mail fraud and bank fraud. And you know, at the time of the standoff, there weren't a lot of people that knew the type of mail and bank fraud that the ROT had been conducting. We're talking millions of dollars. And they were writing checks from the state's coffers using the official state seal to buy ammo, weapons, airfare, jewels, furs, you name it, and millions of dollars. And they had a jeweler that I mentioned in my book in Austin who was making them badges that resembled the Texas Ranger badges out of silver, and they weren't paid for. But they had the gumption to write these checks and try to cash them in different banks around the country, one of which was in Puerto Rico. And it's so strange that it was cash, because it was at least $1 million was some of the money that McLaren was spending before he actually was arrested and brought to trial. So we know that they were conducting these types of habits or whatever with different banks. But when they came to trial, they also tried them on violating the National Firearms Act, because they had modified so many weapons and had used them not just for target practice, but were planning to use them against certain individuals, one of which was Governor George W. Bush. They really and truly, they would like to say now, well, you know, we weren't going to hurt anyone, but they hurt a lot of people financially with liens and writing these bogus checks, and they were threatening to kill people, not just you know, people in big United States offices, But there's a rancher, the Walfords, that lived there in the Davis Mountain Resort, and they were threatening to kill him and his whole family at one point. So there might have been just, blowing hot air, but it doesn't matter because they had plans. And when the Rangers went into the house, you'll see the pictures that Jess took of the house that they lived in. They had books on how to make these modified weapons, and they created a magazine to invite other people to join up with them and to fight the U.S. government to reclaim Texas as a nation of its own. And when I interviewed Richard McLaren in 2018 in Amarillo at William P. Clement's unit, he was just as delusional as the day is long. He still believed that he was the rightful owner of this country, this nation of Texas. And he says, I was elected by the people. And I said, well, how many people? Who were the people? But, he believed that he had the right to organize and run Texas as an independent nation. And many of the people that fought with him that day in the standoff remain in jail. The only one that's really out and free, of course, is his ex-common-law wife, Evelyn. She lives in Dallas, the Fort Worth area. And then Otto was released under mandatory supervision in 2020, and Scheit died of cancer in Colorado. But everybody else is still in prison. And Richard McLaren is not just in prison, he's in isolation in prison. So he spent 25 years so far in isolation, being allowed out maybe once a day to get some fresh air. And
Federal prison or?
this is a state prison, though, because he has to serve his 99 years before he serves the 12 years the federal government sentenced him to.